I always thought I knew who I was until a stranger at a pharmacy shattered my entire life with just 5 words. You look like my sister. At first I brushed it off. People had told me before that I had one of those faces familiar, easy to mistake. But the way she said it, her voice trembling, her hands clutching the strap of her bag like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing, it was different. And then when she spoke again, my whole body turned to ice. She went missing 25 years ago. I laughed nervously the way you do when you want to escape someone's intensity without causing a scene. But then she said, a name. My name. Rachel. My fingers went numb and the prescription bottle in my hand slipped, hitting the floor with a crack as pills scattered in every direction. She didn't even look at the mess. She was staring straight into me, her eyes wide and wet. Rachel Marie Anderson. I whispered my name back to her, trying to steady myself. Jessica. Jessica Rachel Thompson. That middle name, Rachel, suddenly sounded like an accusation. My parents had told me it was after a grandmother I'd never met. A grandmother who, according to them, died before I was born, but this woman, this stranger, was telling me something different. You have her eyes, she said softly. Green with little gold flecks. And that scar above your eyebrow? Without thinking, my hand rose to the faint scar just above my right eye. A childhood accident. I'd always believed a bike crash when I was 7. My dad had rushed me to the ER. My mom held my hand while they stitched me up. I remembered it clearly. Or at least I thought I did. The woman's voice cracked. Rachel got that scar when she was 7, 2 weeks before she disappeared. The pharmacy walls seemed to close in on me, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps. She asked my age, 32. She'd be 32, the woman whispered. Then with a trembling hand, she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. A little girl grinned back at me with 2 missing front teeth, her green eyes flecked with gold, her chin and nose identical to mine. My knees nearly buckled. I'm sorry, I stammered, stepping back. I think you're confused. But even as I said it, my skin crawled with the truth I was trying to deny. Because I had the birthmark she described on my left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. Something I'd always thought was unique, even special. She was crying now, her voice hoarse. Rachel, my baby sister. I ran. I left the pharmacy without my prescription, without my dignity, and maybe without my identity. The rain outside hit me like cold needles as I sprinted to my car. I locked the doors, pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and tried to breathe. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked back at me with the same face I'd seen all my life, but suddenly I wasn't sure who that face belonged to. At home, I pulled out my family photo albums, desperate for something solid. Page after page showed me as a child, but never younger than 3. My 3rd birthday cake smeared across my cheeks. Christmas at age 4, hugging a stuffed elephant. First day of preschool at 5. But there were no baby pictures, no newborn hospital shots, no first steps, first words, or toddler milestones. My life according to those albums began at 3 years old. I called my mother. My voice shook. Why don't I have any baby pictures? The pause on the other end of the line lasted too long. Then she spoke. We've told you before. The house fire when you were 3, we lost everything. What house fire? I demanded. Where? Sacramento. Before we moved to Portland. Where in Sacramento? What was our address? Her breathing grew shallow. I don't remember. But I knew my mother's memory sharp as a knife, able to recall the smallest detail from years ago. She still had the receipt from my first pair of kindergarten shoes. And now she couldn't remember where we'd lived. I hung up my hands, shaking so violently, I nearly dropped the phone. I went into the bathroom, pulled down my shirt, and stared at the birthmark on my left shoulder. A perfect crescent moon. That night I couldn't sleep. My thoughts spun, colliding into each other like cars in a pileup. Was I Jessica or Rachel? And if I was Rachel, what had happened to me? I messaged my best friend Ashley, begging her to come over. When she arrived, still in her scrubs from work, I spilled everything: the pharmacy, the scar, the photo, the missing girl. She tried to reason it out, her voice calm. It could be a coincidence. Lots of kids fall off bikes. Rachel is a common name. But then I told her about the albums, about my parents' vague answers, about the missing years before I turned 3. Her face darkened. Jess, I think you need to find her. The woman. Get answers. Her words settled in me like a stone, because I already knew she was right. Ashley found Carol's profile in minutes. Retired teacher, a garden in full bloom across her cover photo, and albums that felt like open doors I wasn't ready to walk through. One was titled Never Forgotten. My finger hovered. Then I clicked. A family portrait filled the screen, a younger Carol, with a man I assumed was her husband, an older girl with a shy smile, and a 7-year-old with a gap-toothed grin that made my stomach drop. It was my face. The caption read, "The last photo of our complete family." Rachel went missing 2 weeks later. I wrote to Carol through trembling hands, "This is Jessica from the pharmacy. I think we need to talk." She replied within minutes, suggesting a quiet cafe on Hawthorne the next afternoon. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the birthmark on my shoulder, the scar above my brow, the photo of a girl who felt both familiar and unreachable. Carol arrived holding a large tote and moved like someone who had learned to carry heavy things carefully. We sat by the window, two strangers with a story between us. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. "I know this is—" She didn't finish. Some sentences break apart under their own weight. She slid a manila folder onto the table and opened it. I had expected a photograph or two. Instead, a life spilled out: missing person flyers, police reports, newspaper clippings, the Denver Post headline that read, "Local girl vanishes from backyard." In the description, left-handed scar above right eyebrow, birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on the left shoulder. I touched the edge of a flyer. The paper was worn creased where worry palms had folded it 1,000 times. "I don't remember any of this," I whispered. "You were 7, Carol said. "Trauma steals light first. Then it steals pictures. Sometimes it gives pieces back." From the tote she produced a small stuffed elephant so faded it was almost the color of breath. "This was yours. Peanut. You wouldn't sleep without him." I lifted the toy and felt something move inside my chest, like a door unlatching in a dark room. Not a memory. An echo of one. The soft rub of fabric against a cheek. The weight of a small comfort carried from room to room. "Please," Carol said. "Let's make room for truth." She took out a DNA kit. "I already did my part. If you're willing, we can know for sure." The box looked absurdly small for what it promised to hold. I felt the cafe tilt. Behind the counter, cups clinked, a milk steamer hissed, a song played too cheerfully for the ceremony unfolding at our table. I swabbed the inside of my cheek with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Carol sealed the envelope like it was a prayer. "Expedited," she murmured. 10 to 14 days. Numbers that sounded like forever pressed flat. Before we parted, she reached across and took my hand, the way some people steady a glass before pouring. "Your parents," she said carefully. "Susan and Michael Thompson. I need to understand how they found you." "They're good people," I blurted, reflex more than belief. "They love me." She nodded. "I'm not denying love. I'm asking about truth." I thought of my mother's pause on the phone, the invented fire, the unremembered address, the albums that began at age 3. I thought of all the times we'd never gone back to show me where I'd been a baby. Sometimes the shape of a lie is the space it leaves around it. The days that followed were measured in refreshes. I checked my email like it was a heartbeat constant, searching, panicked. I worked in fragments, answered clients on autopilot, and avoided my parents' calls. When the result finally arrived, the subject line was bland, almost bureaucratic. "Your DNA match is ready." I stared for 20 minutes, bargaining with the unopened message like it could still be changed by the force of my hesitation. Then I clicked. 99.9% match. Rachel Marie Anderson. The room contracted. I sat on my bathroom floor and wept until my breath stuttered and my palms were cold against tile. The tears didn't pick a side between grief and relief. They belonged to dissolution, the liquid state between selves. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday because old habits told me they'd both be home and because some confrontations feel like church. My mother opened the door with a smile that dissolved the moment she saw my face. "We need to talk," I said, and heard my voice steady itself without me. We sat on their beige couch, the one I'd fallen asleep on 100 Thanksgiving afternoons. I put the printed result on the coffee table. My mother began to cry. My father stared like the words were a language he used to speak but could no longer pronounce. We wanted a baby so badly, my mother began voice collapsing over years of wanting. There were miscarriages, failed adoptions. Then a cousin called. She said there was a little girl who needed a home. My father's mouth trembled. "We suspected," he said, "but we were desperate. We told ourselves we were saving you." They told me their names had been different once, that they'd moved, changed just enough to blur, avoided the news, avoided milk cartons, avoided posters with the face I wore. Love had not kept them from a crime. It had made a house for it and hung curtains. "I had a family," I said. They were searching. The sentence tasted like iron. My parents, Susan and Michael, who had packed lunches and stood at school plays, stared at the carpet, and I understood with a sharp, unbearable clarity that two truths could live side by side without canceling. I had been stolen, and I had been loved. One didn't acquit the other. Both would live in me. My mother reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't close my fingers either. Somewhere a kitchen clock counted how long it takes to remake a life. That night I went home and put Peanut the elephant on my dresser. He looked both ordinary and holy under the lamplight. I called Carol. I couldn't say the words, so I breathed them. "It's me." She started to cry in the soft, astonished way of someone who has run a marathon for 25 years and finally sees the finish line. "Hi, Rachel," she said. My throat closed. "I'm still Jessica," I whispered. "I think I'm both." On my shoulder, the crescent moon birthmark felt like a fingerprint I was learning to read. In the mirror, my face did not change. Only what it meant did. When Carol invited me to dinner at her house, I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles blanched, wondering if stepping through that door meant erasing everything I'd lived as Jessica. But then I thought of the folder she carried, the elephant she saved, the way her voice broke when she said, "Hi, Rachel," and I knew some truths don't wait forever. The house smelled of rosemary and old wood. Family photos covered the walls, holidays, graduations, a wedding, a vacation at the coast. Faces I didn't know, and one I did. The missing posters had aged, but here she hadn't. Rachel at 7 smiled from frames as if she'd only stepped out to play. Carol's husband, Mark, greeted me with tears already glistening. He hugged me like someone who'd rehearsed this embrace 1,000 times in his head, but never thought he'd get the chance. Their daughter Emma, my sister. If I let the word form, stood in the doorway, clutching her coffee mug like a shield. She was older than me by 3 years, her features similar enough to feel like fate. She didn't speak at first, just stared as if memorizing a ghost that had returned with breath. Dinner was awkward and holy all at once. Mark asked careful questions: what books I liked, what work I did, whether I loved dogs or cats. Normal things that felt monumental because of who was asking. Carol kept refilling my glass, as though thirst was something she could save me from. Emma stayed quiet until dessert. Then she looked at me and whispered, "I used to set a plate for you every birthday, even when everyone told me to stop." Her words cracked the dam inside me. Tears spilled, not gentle but heavy, unstoppable. I told her about the albums that began at age 3, about the invented fire, about how I had believed love was enough explanation for the missing. We sat in silence, after broken only by the clink of forks on plates that had waited 25 years for this gathering. But reunion is not repair. That night back in my apartment, I lay awake thinking of Susan and Michael, my parents who weren't, who were, who had braided my hair for the first day of school, who had stolen me from a backyard. Rage burned through my veins, thick and disorienting. I wanted to call the police to demand justice, to see handcuffs on wrists that had once fastened my mittens. Yet grief tangled with the fury, because I had loved them. Love doesn't dissolve cleanly under truth. It clings sticky and aching. Days blurred into weeks. Carol called often, her voice gentle, never pushing. Emma sent texts, photos of the park we'd once played and stories of games she'd made up to keep me alive in her imagination. I visited again, and each time I stepped into their house, I felt the lines between Jessica and Rachel blur a little more. Still at night, I heard Susan's lullabies in my head, remembered Michael teaching me to ride a bike. Was I supposed to hate them, to forgive them, to cut them out like a cancer, or to live with the scar tissue? One evening, Carol asked if I wanted to see the box. She led me to a small cedar chest in her attic, dust curling in the lamplight. Inside were things saved from a vanished child: a pair of tiny sneakers, a hair ribbon, school drawings with blocky letters. And then at the bottom, a diary with just a few entries in childish scrawl. The last one was dated 2 weeks before I disappeared. Emma taught me a song today. Mommy says we'll go to the fair. I hope we get cotton candy. I touched the page and something inside me split. Not memory, but marrow. A life I had lived and lost in the same breath. The police case reopened quietly, investigators speaking to me with solemn patience. DNA closed questions they couldn't 30 years ago. Susan and Michael were brought in for questioning. My mother, or the woman who raised me, called me after. Her voice was raw, stripped of its careful lies. "I'm sorry," she said. "We didn't steal you. You were dropped off. Someone owed us a favor, said you needed a home. We didn't ask enough questions. I didn't know if that was truth, half-truth, or another mask. What I knew was that silence had raised me as much as she had." I told Carol and Mark. They didn't ask me to choose, not yet. They just held me in a circle that made space for both grief and grace. Emma sat close and whispered, "Even if you're still Jessica, you're Rachel too. You don't have to give one up to keep the other." That night, I placed Peanut the elephant between my pillow and the wall. I pressed my hand to the crescent birthmark on my shoulder and whispered both names into the dark. Jessica, Rachel. I waited for one to feel heavier, but both settled into me like twin anchors. Weeks stretched into months, and I lived like a woman straddling two mirrors. In one reflection, I was Jessica, the daughter of Susan and Michael, the girl who wore braces at 12, who went to prom in a pale blue dress her mother had sewn by hand, who brought her father coffee in his workshop on Saturdays. In the other reflection, I was Rachel, the missing child, on yellowed posters, the sister Emma mourned on every birthday, the daughter whose name Carol whispered into empty rooms for decades. Both were me, and both felt incomplete when separated. The investigation moved slowly, as though the truth itself had to be handled with gloves. Detectives asked me to recount what I remembered of my early years, but all I could offer were fragments: the smell of sawdust, the sound of someone humming off-key, the scrape of gravel under tires late at night. They told me memory can bury itself so deep that it needs time and safety to resurface. For the first time in years, I realized I actually had both. I tried to keep working, but even designing websites felt surreal, like painting walls in a house whose foundation had shifted. My clients noticed the distance in my voice, though they were kind. Ashley became my anchor. She brought over wine and cheap takeout, listening to me cry one night and rage the next. "You don't have to solve it all at once," she said. "Just breathe, one name at a time." But breathing wasn't simple. Susan called every few days, her voice frantic, begging to see me. Michael stayed silent, which hurt more. When I finally agreed to meet, it was in a public park, the kind with children on swings and dogs chasing tennis balls. My mother, my not mother, looked older than I remembered, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "We loved you," she whispered. "We still do." I sat stiffly on the bench, the sounds of laughter around us mocking the ruin between us. "You lied," I said. "You built my whole life on a lie." Tears rolled down her face. "We wanted a baby so badly, and when you came we couldn't let go. We told ourselves it was fate." She pressed her hand to her chest. "If we give you up now, what does that make us, monsters?" I stood, the weight of her words pressing into me. "You don't get to decide what you are. You already did." That night I went to Carol's. She held me without questions, and Mark sat quietly in his chair, offering the steadiness of presence. Emma brought out an old photo album, its cover worn smooth from years of searching. "These are yours," she said softly, flipping to pages of Rachel with messy pigtails and cotton candy smiles. I touched the images like relics, feeling both awe and ache. I couldn't remember being that child, but she remembered me. She had been carried in boxes and prayers and songs Emma sang to herself when no one was listening. The more I let myself into their home, the more pieces of Rachel surfaced. One evening, Carol played an old lullaby on the piano, simple tender notes that made my throat tighten. I began to hum along, without knowing why, the melody buried somewhere deep inside me. Emma gasped. "You remember?" I shook my head, tears falling. "No, my body does." Healing wasn't linear. Some mornings I woke sure of who I was. Others I felt split, like I'd been spliced into two timelines. Therapy helped me hold both truths. My therapist said identity isn't subtraction, it's addition. You're not erasing Jessica to become Rachel. You're learning how to be whole. But wholeness still felt foreign. I avoided mirrors, sometimes unsettled by a face that belonged to both families, both stories. I wondered if love could ever be enough to balance the theft, if forgiveness could coexist with betrayal. One day, Emma asked if I'd join them at the cemetery. They had a gravestone for Rachel carved years ago, when hope had thinned but never died. The inscription read, "Beloved daughter and sister, never forgotten." Standing over it, I felt disoriented, like I was mourning myself while still breathing. Carol traced the letters with her fingers. "I don't know what to do with this, now," she admitted. "Do we remove it? Change it?" I knelt and placed my hand on the stone. "Leave it," I said. She was real. She was lost. And she found her way back. My words weren't polished, but they were true. That night I dreamed of two little girls holding hands, one named Jessica, one named Rachel, walking into a house together. In the dream, no one asked me to choose. Months passed and the world learned my story before I was ready. A journalist picked up the reopened case and soon headlines appeared. "Missing girl found after 25 years, living under a new name." Strangers reached out, flooding my inbox with messages, some full of compassion, others sharp with judgment. People wanted a hero, a villain, a neat ending. But what they got was me. A woman unraveling, trying to stitch two lives together without tearing. I leaned on Emma more than anyone. She took me to the lake where we used to play, showing me the dock where we'd eaten popsicles, the trail where she claimed I'd once raced her and won. I tried to remember, closing my eyes, breathing in the smell of pine and water, but memory didn't come. What came instead was grief, a grief for all the moments stolen from us. "I missed you every day," she whispered. I hugged her, not because I remembered, but because I believed her. Susan and Michael's trial went forward not for kidnapping, the statute of limitations blurred that, but for falsifying records, for obstruction, for the lies that reshaped a life. Sitting in the courtroom, I felt the strange ache of being both witness and evidence. Susan wept on the stand, describing how badly she'd wanted a child, how she convinced herself she was saving me. Michael sat rigid, eyes lowered, as if his silence might protect him from the truth. The judge's gavel echoed like thunder when the sentence came: probation, community service, mandatory counseling. No prison. Some called it mercy. Others called it injustice. I called it unfinished. Afterward, Susan begged to see me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She looked fragile, her once perfect hair now streaked with gray, her hands clutching mine as though she could will me back into her daughter. "Please don't hate us," she whispered. "We gave you love." My voice shook, but I held her gaze. "You gave me love built on theft. That doesn't make it less love, but it doesn't make it right." She sobbed, and I left carrying the weight of both her love and her crime. Carol never pushed me, but her joy at having me back was steady, quiet, like a flame that refused to burn out. She showed me boxes of letters she'd written over the years, birthday cards she never sent, journal entries addressed to a daughter she prayed was still alive. Reading them felt like stepping into an alternate life, one where I had never been stolen. It hurt, but it healed too because those letters proved something unshakable I had been wanted all along. One evening, Emma and I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. She asked, "Do you feel like Rachel yet?" I thought for a long moment. I feel like both, and neither. Maybe I'll always be in between. She nodded. Then in between is where we'll meet. I started volunteering with a group that helps reunite missing children with families. Sitting with parents hearing their stories, I saw my own pain mirrored in their eyes. I told them what Carol had taught me: hope isn't a straight line. It bends, it frays, but it doesn't break. The gravestone stayed in the cemetery untouched. But on my 30th third birthday, we gathered there, Carol, Mark, Emma, and me. We placed flowers not to mourn, but to mark survival. "She's still here," Carol said, tears slipping down her cheeks. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost visiting my own grave. I felt whole enough to stand between names, between lives, and call both mine. That night, I lay in bed with Peanut the elephant tucked against me. I whispered both names, Jessica, Rachel, and let them settle into me without fighting. Maybe I didn't need to choose. Maybe my identity was not about erasing, but about expanding, about carrying both truths with the courage of someone who has lived two lives in one body. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Stories like mine aren't easy, but they matter. They remind us that identity isn't fixed by birth or broken by lies. It's built every day by the courage to face truth. If this touched you, please like the video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you want to hear more real stories, raw and honest, subscribe to the channel. There are more to come. Because sometimes finding yourself isn't about choosing one name, it's about learning to carry them all.